The static wasn't in the air. It was in the soul, a constant, grinding hum at the edge of thought. That was the only lullaby my people had known for a generation. We were Signian, and our spirits were woven from the light of our home star, a dying giant whose final, shuddering breaths had become a plague upon our consciousness. We called it the gray fading, a slow unraveling of the self as the celestial anchor that defined us grew weak, its light turning from a golden roar to a blood-red whisper. I was Kalen, and as a resonator, I felt the fading more keenly than most. My mind, built to sense the delicate harmonies of the cosmos, was now a receiver tuned to a symphony of decay, the final agonizing notes of our star playing on a loop inside my skull, punctuated by the silent, psychic screams of my kin as their memories, their very sense of being, frayed into nothing. That was why I had come to the Threshold, a ghost station caught in the throat of the Caliban Nebula, a place where dead ships came to be forgotten and desperate souls came to make deals that cost more than coin. The station itself was a testament to failure, a skeletal lattice of rust and sorrow that turned slowly in the nebula's multicolored dust, haunted by the psychic residue of 1,000 last-ditch efforts and final, lonely breaths. My empathic senses were a curse here, tasting the phantom terror in the corroded bulkheads and the lingering despair that clung to the viewports like frost. But desperation was a currency, and I was bankrupt. The offer had come through a scrambled channel, a human voice, smooth and confident, promising the impossible a cure. They called themselves the Wayfinder Collective, a name that was both hopeful and predatory, a very human contradiction. They knew of the gray fading, and they claimed to have developed a synthetic anchor, a psycho-resonant matrix that could mimic the light of a healthy star and give my people's consciousness something to cling to. It was a miracle, the kind of salvation that only appears in the final verses of a tragedy. And it had a price. They needed me. Not my ship, not my labor, but the unique, dangerous talent that came with being a Signian resonator. My mind could attune to frequencies others couldn't even detect, could amplify the faintest whisper of energy into a roar, a trait that had once made us the galaxy's finest navigators and was now the very thing tearing me apart. Elias Thorne was the human who met me at the docking ring, his smile too bright for the dim and flickering lights of the Threshold. He was tall and lean, dressed in a crisply tailored corporate uniform that seemed laughably out of place amidst the grime and decay. His handshake was firm, his eyes a piercing blue that held no warmth, only a terrifying, all-consuming focus. "Kalen," he said, his voice exactly as it had been on the comms, a blade wrapped in velvet. "On behalf of the Wayfinder Collective, welcome. We are on the verge of the next great leap for all sentient life, and we are honored that you will be a part of it." He spoke of greatness and honor, but my senses tasted the truth of him, a ravenous ambition, a disregard for consequence so profound it was a psychic void, a man who would burn a galaxy to warm his hands and call the light progress. He led me through corridors that were more like wounds, past human engineers and technicians who moved with a frantic, obsessive energy. They were all like Thorne, their minds sharp and narrow, focused on their tasks with a fervor that bordered on zealotry. They didn't feel the station's pain, the chorus of ghosts that whispered in my own mind. To them, it was just a shell, a resource, a dead thing to be plundered for its secrets. The secret, Thorne explained as we rode a groaning lift down into the station's core, was what they called the Silent Orrery. A relic, he explained, his voice echoing in the cramped space. Left by a civilization so ancient they make the progenitors look like toddlers. We found it in the station's heart, shielded by layers of exotic matter we're still trying to comprehend. It emits a signal, Kalen, a waveform of impossible complexity. We believe it's the key to true FTL, not the crude jump gates we use now, but a method of folding reality itself. A gateway, not through space, but of space. My throat felt dry. The ancients, the progenitors, had left warnings scattered across the star lanes, monolithic markers and psychic beacons that all screamed the same message: some doors are not meant to be opened. Humanity, in its relentless, adolescent dash for power, had always treated these warnings as quaint suggestions. The signal is too faint, Thorn continued, his eyes gleaming with that chilling focus. Our instruments can barely register its harmonics. We've tried to amplify it, to interface with it, but the feedback is catastrophic. It shatters our AIs and drives our own psychics mad. But you, a Signian Resonator, your mind is structured differently. You aren't built to receive and interpret. You are built to resonate, to become one with the signal, to amplify it from within. You will be our tuning fork. Kalen, you will help us turn the key. The lift shuddered to a halt, and the doors opened onto a cavernous chamber. The air was cold, sterile, and buzzed with the thrum of immense power. In the center of the chamber, suspended in a crackling containment field, was the orrery. It was a perfect sphere of a material that was not black, but an absence of light, a hole in reality that drank the illumination from the overhead floodlamps. Intricate golden filaments, thinner than thread, webbed its surface, shifting and realigning in a silent, mathematical ballet. It was beautiful and terrifying, its very presence a violation of known physics. The psychic pressure was immense, a crushing weight that made my teeth ache and my vision swim. It was not the ambient sorrow of the station. This was something else, something singular and focused. It wasn't dead and not a relic. It was dormant. It's quiet, I managed to say, the word catching in my throat. Thorn's smile widened. Precisely. The silent orrery. We believe it's in a low energy state, waiting for the correct resonant frequency to awaken it. That's where you come in. He gestured to a chair, an ugly, menacing thing of wires and cranial interfaces, positioned just outside the containment field. The deal is simple. You sit. You reach out with your mind, attune yourself to the orrery's whisper, and become its voice. You amplify the signal until our systems can lock onto it, decode it, and harness it. In return, he paused, tapping a data pad on his wrist. The first shipment of the Matrix anchors is being transferred to your people's home system as we speak. By the time you are finished here, the gray fading will be a memory for them. The bribe was also a chain. He had paid me before the work was done, ensuring I had no choice but to see it through. He was caging me with the salvation of my own kind. I thought of my elders, their minds like beautiful, fading tapestries. I thought of the children, born into a world where the self was a temporary state. The static in my own skull seemed to grow louder, a chorus of despair urging me onward. I walked to the chair, the hum of the containment field vibrating in my bones, the cold silence of the orrery pulling at me like a tide. I sat, and the technicians, moving with practiced, impersonal efficiency, attached the contacts to my temples, the cold metal a stark contrast to the burning anxiety in my chest. It's safe, Thorn said, his voice a placating murmur from a control booth above. The field will protect you from any physical backlash. Just focus on the signal. Let it flow through you. I closed my eyes, shutting out the sterile chamber, the hungry look on Thorn's face, the pity I saw in the eyes of one of the younger technicians. I pushed past the ghosts of the threshold, past the psychic scream of my dying star, and reached out, casting the net of my consciousness toward the silent sphere. At first, there was nothing, just the cold, immense pressure of its existence. It was like standing at the shore of a frozen ocean. Then, I felt it. A flicker, a whisper so faint it was less than a sound, a phantom impression on the edge of my senses. It was the signal Thorn spoke of, a pattern of stunning, alien complexity that made my mind ache. I focused on it, opened myself to it, letting my own psychic energy resonate with its frequency. Just as I was trained to do, I became the tuning fork. The whisper grew, becoming a murmur, then a clear, steady tone. The golden filaments on the orrery surface began to glow, their silent dance becoming faster, more intricate. The hum in the room intensified, and the human technicians began to shout, their voices a mix of triumph and awe as their consoles lit up with data. "We have it," Thorn's voice boomed, ecstatic. "He's doing it. The signal is stabilizing. We're getting a lock." I was a conduit, a living amplifier, and the energy flowing through me was intoxicating, terrifying. The complex patterns of the signal were more than just data. They were language. They were mathematics. They were a blueprint for reality itself. Thorn was right. This was a power beyond jump gates, beyond anything the galaxy had ever known. But as the signal grew stronger, flowing through me and out into the human machines, I felt something else unfurl within it. Beneath the layers of mathematics and physics, behind the elegant, clockwork precision, was a subharmonic I had not initially sensed. It was not part of the mechanical signal. It was a cage made of it. And inside that cage was a consciousness. It was not human, not Signian, not anything I could comprehend. It was vast, ancient, and patient. It had been waiting, sleeping in its silent prison for eons. And my resonance, my amplification of its cage's frequency, was shaking the bars. It stirred, and I felt its mind brush against mine. There was no greeting, no plea, no rage. There was only a single, pure, undiluted concept that flooded my senses and nearly stopped my heart. Hunger. It was a starvation that had lasted for millennia, a cosmic emptiness that longed to be filled. The orrery was not a key. It was a lock. It was not a gateway. It was a cage. And Thorn, in his blind ambition, had just handed me the tool to open it, believing he was about to enlighten the galaxy when, in fact, he was about to serve it up as a feast. The signal I was amplifying, the very thing that was powering their machines and making Thorn a god among men, was not the sound of the orrery awakening. It was the sound of its prison slowly, inexorably, breaking. And the consciousness within, this ancient, starving thing, knew it. It knew I was there. It wrapped a cold tendril of thought around my mind and showed me what it wanted, what it would do when the bars finally gave way. I saw stars being eaten like fruit, their light and life siphoned into a vast and patient maw. I saw worlds silenced, their vibrant psychic energies, the very thing that made my own people sentient, drained until they were nothing but barren rock and dust. I saw the human technicians around me, their minds bright, fleeting sparks of energy, and I felt the entity's desire for them, a gourmet's appreciation for a rare delicacy. A wave of nausea and terror so profound, it was physical, crashed over me. I tried to pull back, to sever the connection, but it was too late. My mind was entangled with the signal, with the cage, with the prisoner inside. I had become the key, and the lock was beginning to turn. On the control deck, Thorn was laughing, his face illuminated by the readouts from his consoles, a man witnessing the dawn of a new age. Down in the chamber with me, the younger technician who had shown me pity now looked away, unable to watch. He must have seen it in the violent tremors that now racked my body, in the trickle of blood that ran from my nose. He must have known, on some level, that this was not progress. This was an execution, and in a desperate bid to save my people from a slow fade into twilight, had just lit the fuse on a bomb that would extinguish the stars themselves, beginning with this forgotten station and everyone in it. The prisoner in the orrery pulsed with anticipation, and for the first time, it sent a coherent thought directly to me, a thought that was not a vision of cosmic horror, but a simple, terrifying promise. Soon. The word soon was not a sound, it was a chisel, carving itself into the soft tissue of my consciousness. It echoed in the hollow spaces of my bones, a promise of annihilation delivered with the calm certainty of a rising tide. My body was a prisoner in the technician's chair, but my mind was adrift in a cold, black sea, with the entity's presence as the only island, an island made of teeth and endless, impatient hunger. The euphoric shouts from the control booth above were a distant, meaningless noise. The chatter of mayflies celebrating the sunrise. Oblivious to the coming winter, Thorn saw numbers climbing on a screen and called it success. I felt the glacier of a god's appetite beginning to move and knew it to be the end. My first instinct was to sever the connection, to retreat into the shell of my own mind and slam the door. But the attempt was futile. The resonance was a two-way street. I was not merely broadcasting. I was entangled. The signal flowed through me, and the prisoner flowed with it, its cold thoughts weaving around my own like parasitic vines. To pull away now would be like trying to tear my own soul in half. The backlash would not just kill me. It would likely shatter my consciousness into a million screaming fragments. A psychic ghost to haunt this station alongside all the others. The entity sensed my panic, and its mental touch shifted from a promise of doom to something far more insidious seduction. They built my prison, it whispered, the thought not mine but wearing the texture of my own voice. A perfect mimicry designed to disarm. They are humans. They cage what they do not understand. They use you, little Resonator, just as they would have used me, a tool, a means to an end. We are kin, you and I, both prisoners of their ambition. Visions flooded my mind. Unbidden, I saw the collective's boardrooms, sterile environments where beings were discussed as assets and civilizations as markets. I saw Thorn pitching his project, speaking of my people not with compassion, but as a unique biological resource, the Signian component necessary for his great work. I saw the calculated nature of their salvation, a cure dangled like bait on a hook. The truth in the visions was undeniable, a poison that soured the hope I had clung to. The gray fading was a tragedy, but to the Wayfinder Collective, it was leverage. Your star is dying, the entity continued, its voice a soothing balm over the raw wound of my despair. Its light is a memory. Your people cling to an echo, and soon there will be only silence. Let me be their new star. My energy is eternal. My light is boundless. Free me, and I will anchor them. I will give them a resonance so powerful, so absolute, that their minds will never fade again. They will be part of something greater. They will be part of me. The offer was monstrous. A Faustian bargain of the highest order trade, a gentle fading into nothingness for an eternity as a psychic thrall, a thought in the mind of a devouring god. It was the difference between a quiet death in bed and becoming a single, screaming cell in an immortal cancer. Yet, for a horrifying second, I felt the logic of it. Survival at any cost. Wasn't that the core tenet of all life? Wasn't that the very reason I had come to this forsaken place? The physical world began to protest. Low, guttural groan echoed through the chamber, the sound of the station's ancient spine beginning to bend under an impossible load. The lights overhead flickered violently, casting the orrery in strobing flashes of sickly green from the emergency beacons. A shower of sparks rained down from a ruptured conduit near the ceiling. In the control booth, I could hear a new urgency in the technicians' voices. Power fluctuations are off the charts. The primary reactor is redlining, one shouted. Thorne's voice cut through the rising panic, sharp and commanding. It's feedback from the signal integration. The orrery is interfacing with the station's core systems. It's more than we could have hoped for, Jorik. Stabilize the energy flow. Reroute auxiliary power to the containment field. I saw the young technician, Jorik, his face pale and beaded with sweat. His fingers flew across his console, but his eyes were wide with a terror that went beyond a simple power surge. He knew. He could see in the data what Thorne's ambition refused to accept. "Sir," he said, his voice tight, "the energy signature isn't stable. It's chaotic. The waveform is degrading. It's not a successful interface. It's a rejection. The orrery isn't connecting with our systems. It's trying to consume them." "Nonsense," Thorne snapped, his voice a whip crack over the intercom. "You're misreading the data. Maintain protocol. The Signian is the key. As long as he maintains the resonance, the system will stabilize." But I wasn't maintaining it. I was fighting it. The entity's monstrous offer had solidified my resolve. I would not be the architect of this galaxy's damnation. Not for my people. Not for anything. I couldn't sever the connection, but perhaps I could corrupt it. I was a resonator, an amplifier, but I was also a musician of the cosmos. I could introduce a new note into the symphony, focusing every ounce of my will. I pushed back against the pure, malevolent harmony of the prisoner's signal. I introduced a dissonance, a psychic scream of my own, a note of pure Signian sorrow and defiance. I poured the feeling of the gray fading, the slow, quiet unraveling of my people, into the torrent of energy, twisting the signal from a clear channel into a howl of pain. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. In my mind, the entity recoiled, not in pain, but in sheer, alien outrage. The smooth, seductive whispers turned into a shriek of fury that felt like nails dragging across my soul. Physically, the chamber convulsed. The orrery, the perfect sphere of nothingness, began to flicker, its surface distorting as if the very laws of physics that held it together were being warped. The golden filaments on its surface burned with a blinding white light, and the containment field around it sputtered, its blue energy wall thinning and warping like melting glass. Alarms blared across the station, a cacophony of sirens and automated warnings. "Containment field failure imminent," a voice screamed from the booth. "The signal is collapsing. It's a total cascade." My body was being torn apart. The feedback loop was unimaginable. The entity's rage and the corrupted signal were at war inside my nervous system. Blood streamed from my eyes and ears, and the restraints on the chair groaned as my body seized uncontrollably. I was dying, but I was dying with my teeth in the throat of the beast. Through the red haze of my vision, I saw Jorik again. He had abandoned his post and was staring down at me, his face a mask of horror and dawning comprehension. He looked at me, then at the failing containment field, then at Thorne. Who was now screaming orders that no one was following? The chain of command had broken. Survival had taken over. Thorn, his face purple with rage, finally seemed to grasp that he had lost control. His dream of folding space was collapsing into a miniature black hole in the heart of his ghost station. But his ambition was not so easily extinguished. It simply changed its shape, from creation to control. He slammed a large red button on his console. Override initiated. Purge the resonance chamber. Flood it with coolant. We can force the orrery back into a dormant state. Coolant. A super-chilled, neurosuppressive gas that would flash freeze the chamber in seconds. It would stabilize the orrery, perhaps, but it would also kill me instantly, shattering my body like glass. It was a desperate, brutal move, a king sacrificing a single piece to save himself. Orcs saw it. His eyes met mine across the chaos. He saw Thorn's hand on the purge controls. And he saw me, the Signian component, about to be disposed of. In that moment, he made a choice. He lunged, not for an escape pod, but for a manual release lever on the wall of the control booth, a relic of older, more cautious engineering. He threw his entire body against it. Down below, the restraints on my chair snapped open with a sharp crack. I was free. But freedom was a meaningless concept in the heart of a maelstrom. The containment field chose that exact moment to die, with a sound like the universe cracking in half. The blue wall of energy vanished. The psychic pressure wave that erupted from the unshielded orrery was a physical force, a hammer blow that threw me from the chair and sent me skidding across the deck. The technicians in the booth were thrown against the far wall like dolls, Thorn among them. I saw Jorik go down, his head striking the edge of a console. The orrery now hung free in the chamber, its silent menace replaced by a palpable, murderous intent. The tiny invisible crack I had introduced into its prison was now a gaping wound. The golden filament snapped, and a sliver of the absolute blackness at its core began to bleed outward, a creeping stain of anti-reality. The entity was no longer whispering promises. It was screaming in triumph, a sound that was not a sound, but a vibration that was shaking the very atoms of the station apart. I struggled to my feet, my body a symphony of pain, my mind a battlefield of psychic shrapnel. I was on the ground floor with a caged god whose prison was turning to dust. The escape I had been granted was merely a front row seat to the apocalypse I had helped create. The psychic shockwave had scoured the chamber, leaving a silence that was more terrifying than the preceding chaos. It was the silence of a vacuum, the sound of minds being erased. I pushed myself up, my joints screaming in protest. The air tasted of ozone and something else, something metallic and cold that I knew was the taste of pure fear. Across the chamber, the orrery pulsed with a soft, hungry light. The crack in its shell was no longer a crack. It was a wound, a weeping mouth of absolute nothingness that was steadily widening. From it, the anti-reality bled into our dimension, not as a flood, but as a creeping, cancerous fog that made the hard angles of the machinery seem to soften and run like waves. Metal groaned, not from physical stress, but as if in agony from the proximity of this ontological poison. My gaze snapped to the control booth. The protective transparisteel was shattered, and inside, the scene was one of grim stillness. The technicians were still standing or slumped at their consoles, but their vitality was gone. They were statues of flesh, their eyes wide and vacant, their minds not just silenced, but though hollowed out. The entity had feasted on their consciousness, draining them in an instant, leaving behind nothing but biological shells. All of them except two. Thorn was stirring, pushing himself up from the deck, a thin line of blood trickling from his temple. His face was a mask of disbelief and incandescent rage. He wasn't looking at the orrery as a threat, but as a spoiled experiment. And Jorik, he was lying near the manual release, a dark pool spreading from beneath his head. He was alive. I could feel it, a faint, flickering ember of life in the growing psychic darkness. A choice had to be made: escape, or honor the sacrifice of the one human who had shown me a shred of decency. The answer was never in doubt. My people had a saying, a debt repaid is a soul kept whole. I owed him my freedom, however brief it might be. I scrambled across the tilting deck, debris skittering around my feet. The entity's influence was warping local gravity, making the floor feel like the deck of a ship in a hurricane. I reached Yorik's side and gently turned him over. His pulse was weak, his breathing shallow, but he was alive. "You fool!" Thorn's voice, raw and filled with a madman's fury, echoed from the shattered booth. He staggered out onto the command balcony, clinging to the rail for support. "You did this. You contaminated the resonance. You broke it." "I didn't break it, Thorn," I rasped, my throat raw. "I just showed it the door you built." I hooked my arms under Yorik's shoulders, trying to lift him. He was heavier than he looked, a dead weight of unconscious flesh. It could have been beautiful. Thorn lamented, his eyes wild and unfocused, fixed on the pulsing void of the orrery. A new age for humanity. We could have held the universe in our hands. It can still be controlled. It just needs a stronger signal, a purer resonance. He was insane. He was staring into the face of a cosmic predator and seeing only a miscalibrated engine. The entity seemed to sense his renewed focus, his pathetic attempt to reassert dominance. A tendril of the black fog detached itself from the growing mass around the orrery and drifted up toward the control booth. It moved with an unnatural, deliberate slowness. A predator that knew its prey was already trapped. "We have to go," I grunted, finally managing to haul Yorik into a fireman's carry. The strain on my battered body was immense, but the adrenaline of terror was a potent fuel. The only way out was the lift we'd arrived in, a metal cage on the far side of the chamber. Thorn saw me moving, and his madness found a target. "Where do you think you're going? You're the key. You will stay. You will fix this." He stumbled down a short flight of emergency stairs, his movements clumsy but driven by a fanatic's resolve. He held a heavy, metallic tool, a kinetic wrench like a club. I backed away, cradling Jorik, my path to the lift blocked by the man who had orchestrated this entire disaster. "It's over. Thorn. Look around you. You didn't find a key to the universe. You found the thing that eats universes." The tendril of nothingness reached the control booth. As it touched the railing Thorn had been leaning on, the metal didn't melt or break. It simply ceased to exist, raced from reality with a silent, final efficiency. Thorn didn't seem to notice. His world had shrunk to this chamber, to his prize and the alien who had ruined it. "You owe us," he screamed, lunging forward, my Signian reflexes, honed by a lifetime of attuning to subtle cosmic shifts, were all that saved me. I sidestepped his clumsy swing, the wrench whistling past my head and slamming into a bulkhead with a deafening clang. The impact caused a panel above us to shear loose. It fell, a heavy sheet of plasteel, striking Thorn across the shoulders and sending him sprawling to the deck. He cried out in pain and fury, trapped beneath the weight. I didn't hesitate. I ran, my legs pumping, Jorik's weight a terrible, swaying burden. The chamber was a death trap. The orrery's pulse was stronger now, a deep, subsonic thrum that vibrated through my very marrow. I could feel the entity's attention beginning to shift from the psychic echoes in the control booth toward the two living sparks on the chamber floor. It was beginning to notice us properly. The fog of anti-reality was spreading faster, consuming the floor behind me. I risked a glance back. Thorn was struggling to free himself from under the panel, his face a grotesque mask of hatred. His eyes met mine, and in them, I saw no fear of the encroaching void, only the raw, possessive fury of a creator whose creation had been stolen. I reached the lift and slammed my palm against the control panel. The doors, miraculously, groaned open. I bundled Yorick inside, his body slumping to the floor, and jabbed the button for the docking bay level. As the doors began to slide shut, I saw Thorn finally push the plasteel sheet off himself. He staggered to his feet, his leg bent at an unnatural angle. He took one limping step towards the lift, his hand outstretched. A silent plea or a curse. I couldn't tell. Then he stopped. He looked past me, his eyes widening in what I finally recognized as genuine, soul-shattering terror. The entity had turned its full attention to him. The tendrils of non-existence converged on his position, not with speed, but with the inexorable, suffocating finality of a closing fist. The last thing I saw before the lift doors sealed was Thorn's mouth opening in a scream that made no sound, a scream that was swallowed by the silent, hungry void before it could even be born. The lift began its ascent, groaning and shuddering as the station's tormented structure twisted around us. The power flickered, and for a heart-stopping moment, we were plunged into absolute darkness, suspended in the shaft. But then the emergency lights kicked in, bathing the small space in a hellish red glow. I collapsed against the wall, my strength giving out, Yorick's unconscious form at my feet. We were out of the chamber, but we were far from safe. The thrumming of the orrery was gone, replaced by a deeper, station-wide vibration. I could feel the entity's presence expanding, no longer contained. It was sinking its roots into the station's power core, drinking deeply from the fusion reactor. The threshold was no longer just a ghost station. It had become the entity's nursery, its first meal in a new and deliciously vibrant reality. The lift was not a vehicle of escape. It was just a slow ride up to a higher floor in a house that was already burning down from the inside out. My debt to Yorick was paid, but I had a new one now, a debt to the entire galaxy. I had to get him off this station, and I had to find a way to sound the alarm, to warn them of the silent, hungry god I had just unleashed. The lift's ascent was agonizingly slow, each shudder and groan of the station's tortured frame a reminder of the colossal power being unleashed below. The emergency lighting painted everything in arterial red, turning Yorick's pale, unconscious face into a death mask. I checked his pulse again. It was a weak, thready flutter, a moth beating against a closing hand. I had saved his body from the chamber, but his mind. I extended my empathic senses, delicately probing the edges of his consciousness. It was a wasteland. The psychic backlash had ripped through him, leaving behind a landscape of scorched earth and fractured thoughts. He was in a deep, protective coma, his mind walled off from the horror it had witnessed. It was a mercy, I supposed, but a mercy that might be permanent. The lift jolted to a stop, the doors refusing to open. We were stuck. The station-wide vibration had intensified into a rhythmic, almost biological pulse. Boom, boom, boom. It was the sound of the entity's new heart, the station's fusion reactor, now beating to its alien rhythm. I could feel its consciousness seeping through the ship like blood through cloth, tainting every system, tasting every circuit. It was learning, adapting, growing. I tried the lift's emergency comms, but the speaker emitted only a low, guttural static that felt unpleasantly organic. The entity was in the machine. There was an emergency hatch in the ceiling. Gritting my teeth against the fire in my own muscles, I climbed onto the handrail and shoved. It was heavy, sealed with decades of neglect. I put my back into it. My Signian frame, though slender, possessed a wiry strength. With the screech of protesting metal, the hatch gave way. I hauled myself up into the darkness of the lift shaft, then reached down and, with the last of my adrenaline-fueled strength, pulled Yorick's dead weight up after me. The shaft was a vertical maze of cables and conduits, the rhythmic pulse of the station vibrating through the metal ladder that ran up its length. We had to climb. I secured Yorick to my back, using a length of thick power cable I ripped from its housing, his head lolling against my shoulder. The climb was a nightmare. Each rung was a struggle, my body screaming, my mind fighting off the encroaching psychic pressure from the entity below. It wasn't actively hunting us. We were too insignificant. 2 microbes on the skin of its new home, but its mere presence was a corrosive force, fraying the edges of my sanity, whispering temptations of despair and surrender. It showed me visions of my people, their hope turning to ash as the synthetic anchors failed to arrive. It replayed Thorn's final, silent scream on a loop. It was a war of attrition, and I was losing ground with every upward foot. We finally reached the docking bay level, and I pried open the doors, tumbling out into a scene of eerie devastation. The main concourse, usually a hive of shadowy activity, was still. Figures were frozen in place, a human smuggler mid-handshake with a hulking Xylosian. A group of scrappers gathered around a holographic schematic, all of them hollowed out, their minds consumed just as the technicians had been. The entity's initial psychic blast had been wider and more devastating than I had imagined. It had wiped the slate clean. My ship, the Stardust Drifter, a battered but reliable Signian scout vessel, was docked at the far end of the bay. But between me and it stood a new obstacle. The entity was experimenting. Several of the hollowed-out bodies, the husks of the station's former inhabitants, were moving. They shuffled with a jerky, uncoordinated gait, their heads lolling on their necks. They were puppets, their nervous systems hijacked by the entity's expanding will. They weren't a true defense, more like a cat playing with its dead prey. But they were blocking my path. Just a little further, I whispered to the unconscious man on my back, though the words were for myself. I laid him down gently behind a stack of cargo containers, then peered out. There were 5 of them, shambling in a loose, erratic patrol. They didn't seem to have proper senses, responding only to movement and sound. Stealth was the only option. I was a Resonator, not a soldier. My mind was my weapon, but against these mindless things, it was useless. I took a deep breath and darted for my cover, heading for a parallel gantry that offered a more shadowed route. I moved with the silence my people were known for, my feet barely kissing the deck plating. The puppets continued their shuffle, oblivious. I was halfway there when a piece of loose decking rattled under my foot. The sound was small, but in the profound silence of the bay, it was a gunshot. Immediately, the heads of all 5 puppets snapped in my direction. Their movements lost their jerky quality, becoming fluid and terrifyingly fast. They scrambled towards me, their empty eyes fixed on my position, their limbs moving with an unnatural, insect-like precision. They were no longer just shambling bodies. They were extensions of the entity's will. a hand reaching out to crush an annoying fly. I ran. I sprinted for my ship, the air burning in my lungs. One of them, the Xylosian, a creature of immense size and strength, was gaining on me. I could hear its heavy, unnatural footsteps pounding the deck right behind me. I reached the ramp of the drifter and slapped the activation plate. The ramp began to lower with agonizing slowness. The Xylosian was upon me. A massive hand grabbed my shoulder, its grip like iron. It spun me around, and I found myself staring into the vacant, milky eyes of the dead creature. Its mouth opened, and a sound came out, not the Xylosian's deep baritone, but a chorus of whispers, the voices of the consumed technicians, all speaking as one through its dead lips. You cannot leave. The voice was a psychic attack, a wave of despair that buckled my knees. But mixed with the despair was raw information. The entity was using these bodies as nodes, and through them, I could feel its own nascent thoughts more clearly. I could feel its immense, alien confusion as it tried to understand the physical reality it now inhabited. And I could feel its focus, its primary objective, the station's comms array. It was trying to broadcast its signal, the very signal I had amplified, out into the galaxy. It wasn't just consuming the station, it was sending out a dinner invitation. That knowledge was a shot of pure adrenaline. I stomped down hard on the Xylosian's foot, my hard-soled boot crushing the delicate bones. The creature didn't register pain, but the physical damage caused its leg to buckle. Its grip loosened for a fraction of a second long enough for me to wrench free. I scrambled up the ramp just as it closed, sealing with a final, reassuring hiss. I didn't pause. I ran to the cockpit and initiated the pre-flight sequence, my fingers flying over the familiar crystalline controls. Through the forward viewport, I could see the puppets clawing uselessly at the ship's hull. But then, a low groan echoed through the docking bay. The massive magnetic clamps holding the drifter in place were not releasing. The entity was in the station's systems, and it was holding me here. Warning klaxons blared in the cockpit. External pressure detected. The ship's calm, synthesized voice announced. Hull integrity at 90% and falling. The puppets were not just clawing. The entity was reinforcing them, using its power to increase their physical density, turning dead flesh into something as hard as steel. The ship's hull began to creak and dent under the assault. I had one last, desperate option. Every Cygnian ship was equipped with a resonant cascade device, a last-ditch defensive measure. It was designed to emit a targeted, disruptive psychic frequency that could short out computer systems or stun organic minds. It was a sledgehammer, not a scalpel, and using it would fry every non-shielded system on my own ship as well. It was a one-shot weapon that would leave me dead in the water. But dead in the water was better than dead in the docking bay. I diverted all remaining power to the cascade emitter. I'm sorry. Yorick, I said to the still form I had dragged into the cockpit with me. This is going to get loud. I slammed the activation stud. The universe went white. A wave of pure but chaotic psychic energy erupted from my ship. A silent, invisible shockwave that was the conceptual opposite of the entity's ordered, hungry signal. Outside, the puppets were not just thrown back, they disintegrated, their hijacked bodies unable to contain the chaotic resonance. They turned to dust and ash. The docking clamps, their control systems overloaded, sparked and released me in a shower of molten metal. Inside the cockpit, every light died. Every system went silent. The reassuring hum of the engines was gone. We were free, but we were adrift, a dead ship in the shadow of a newborn god. Through the viewport, I saw the station's massive central communications dish, miles away on its outer hull, begin to pivot, angling itself towards the nearest star system. The dinner invitation was about to be sent, and I was floating here in a powerless, silent tomb with only a dying man and the ghosts of my failure for company. The silence in the cockpit was a tangible thing, a heavy blanket woven from dead circuits and profound failure. We were a ghost ship floating in a graveyard, the only light the hellish, pulsing red glow from the threshold station and the cold, indifferent starlight filtering through the Caliban Nebula. Through the viewport, the station's main communications dish was a flower of death, slowly turning its face toward the galaxy, ready to vomit its poison into the void. My ship was a coffin, and I had just locked the lid from the inside. Despair was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making each breath a conscious effort. I had failed. In my attempt to save my people, I had doomed countless others. The synthetic anchors I had traded my soul for would never arrive, and now a tide of psychic oblivion was about to be unleashed, all because of my desperation. A soft groan beside me broke the stillness. Jorik was stirring. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused and clouded with pain. He tried to push himself up, hissing as the movement sent a jolt through his injured body. "Stay still," I said, my voice a dry rasp. "You're hurt." He blinked, his gaze slowly sharpening as it fell on me, then swept around the dead cockpit. What happened, the cascade?" "It worked," I answered, the words tasting like ash. "It got us free, but we're dead in the water. No power, no comms, nothing." He struggled to sit up, his engineer's mind overriding his body's agony. "The comms dish on the station." "I see it," I said grimly. "It's turning, getting ready to broadcast." Yorik's face, already pale, went ashen. "He was right," he whispered, his eyes wide with a terror that went beyond his physical injuries. "Thorn. In the final data logs from the progenitors, they spoke of them, the silent ones, things that sleep in the folds of reality. They don't travel through space, they are the space. The signal isn't a message, Kalen, it's a key. It doesn't just call to them, it rewrites the laws of physics in a localized area to create a new door for them to step through. If that broadcast goes out, it won't just be this system. It'll be 1,000 systems at once." A cold dread, deeper and more absolute than anything I had felt before, settled in my gut. This was worse than a hungry god. This was a plague of reality itself. "There has to be a way," I said, the words feeling hollow even to me. Oric's gaze fell to a small, unassuming panel near my feet, marked with the archaic Signian symbol for heart or core. "The Drifter, it's an older model scout. Isn't it pre-unification tech?" I nodded. "My family's ship, generations old. Does it have a tertiary power core? A fail-safe old ships used to have them. Fully shielded, single-cycle chemical cells, completely isolated from the main systems." Hope, a feeling so alien it was almost painful, flickered in my chest. I ripped the panel open. There it was. A dull, the lead gray cylinder, humming with a faint, contained energy. It was an antique, a relic, designed to provide just enough power for one critical system for a few minutes in the event of a total, catastrophic failure. "It can't run everything," Jorik said, his voice gaining a sliver of strength. "Maybe life support and basic thrusters, or just the main drive. For one short burn that was all we had. We couldn't outrun a faster-than-light signal. We couldn't fight. We couldn't warn anyone. But we could still act. An idea. terrible and final, began to form in my mind. Jorik, I said, my voice steady. You know this station, the reactor Thorn was so proud of, the one the entity is using as its heart. Is there a way to overload it? He stared at me, understanding dawning in his eyes. The coolant intakes, he said, his voice barely a whisper. They're exposed on the outer hull, near the station's equator. A high-energy impact, something to rupture the magnetic containment around the injection ports. It would cause a chain reaction. The core would go critical in seconds. It would be like a star being born. And like a star, it would consume everything nearby. The station, the entity, and any ship close enough to strike the blow. One short burn, I repeated softly. It's enough. Kalen. No, he protested, trying to sit up straighter. We can escape. We can try to warn someone. There's no time, I said, my decision hardening into certainty. I looked at him, the human who had chosen compassion over protocol. My debt was to him, and to everyone else who would be consumed by the fire I had helped to light. But you are not a part of this. My deal, my failure, not yours. There are escape pods on the upper decks, still functional, isolated systems. I'll use the burn to get you there. I'll get you out. Boy, before he could argue, I slammed my hand down on the activation stud for the tertiary core. The ship shuddered violently as the ancient power cell discharged its lifeblood into the main drive. The cockpit lights didn't come on. The consoles remained dark, but I heard it the deep, resonant hum of the engine, waking for one last song. I grabbed the manual flight controls, bypassing all the dead electronics. The drifter was a blunt instrument now, but it could fly. I angled the ship toward the station's upper spire, the thrusters firing in a raw, uncontrolled burst. The entity felt it. The station's rhythmic pulse faltered for a beat, and the psychic pressure intensified tenfold. It knew what I was planning. Its full, undivided attention was now on my tiny, resurrected ship. It came for my mind. You are saving no one. Little Resonator. It hissed, its voice a symphony of every person I had failed. I saw my elders, their minds finally winking out, their last thought a curse on my name. I saw Thorn's face laughing as the galaxy burned. Fly away. Live with what you have done. It is a fitting punishment. Get out of my head. I snarled, my knuckles white on the controls. The ship bucked as a piece of the station's outer plating, animated by the entity's will, detached and flew towards us. I rolled the drifter hard, the debris scraping along our hull with a scream of tortured metal. We reached the escape pod bay. A row of pods sat nestled in their launch tubes, their indicator lights a hopeful green. I brought the ship alongside an external access hatch. Go, I said to Jorik. Now. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a conflict of gratitude and horror. Your people will fade, with or without me, I said. The truth of it a cold, hard stone in my gut. But the rest of the galaxy doesn't have to. Go. Live. Be the one who tells the story. Be the warning. He nodded, a single sharp gesture of understanding. He squeezed my shoulder, a gesture of solidarity that transcended species, then scrambled through the airlock and into the pod. I didn't wait to watch him launch. I sealed my airlock and turned the Stardust Drifter for the last time. My course was set a direct and terminal line to the station's equator, to the glowing heart of the coolant intakes. As I accelerated, the entity unleashed the full force of its psychic fury. It didn't just show me visions, it plunged me into them. I was back on Cygnus, watching my star die, feeling the collective sorrow of my entire race flood my senses. Then the vision shifted. The star wasn't dying. It was being reborn, blazing with a new, dark light. My people were no longer fading. They were singing. Their voices joined in a chorus of praise to their new God, their new anchor, the entity. They were saved, and they were staring at me with adoration. This can be real, the entity promised, its voice a wave of pure, blissful temptation. Join me. Your people will thrive as part of my dawn. You will be their eternal shepherd. For a moment, I wavered. Salvation. It was all I had ever wanted. But I looked at my hands on the controls, and I saw not a shepherd, but a Judas goat. The price was too high. It had always been too high. I am a Signian, I whispered, closing my eyes. My spirit is woven from the light of my home star, and I will not trade it for a crown of shadows. I stopped fighting the entity's presence in my mind. Instead, I opened myself to it completely. I let its vast, hungry consciousness flood in. And then, with every ounce of my being, with the final, defiant act of my soul, I resonated. I didn't push back with sorrow or rage. I became a single, pure, perfect note, the note of my own self, my memories, my love for my people, my shame, my resolve. I became a tuning fork struck for the last time, and I aimed that pure, unwavering frequency directly into the heart of the monster that was trying to consume me. The entity recoiled, not from an attack, but from the sheer, indigestible truth of a soul that refused to be unmade. My mind was on fire, but for a glorious, fleeting moment, I was free. I opened my eyes. The coolant intakes filled the viewport, a swirling vortex of energy. It was beautiful. I felt Yorick's pod launch safely away. I felt the entity's scream of fury and betrayal. And then I felt only light. From the safety of the Nebula's dust clouds, a lone escape pod floated. Its sole occupant watched as the ghost station known as the Threshold was consumed. A new star, brilliant, silent, and impossibly brief, was born in the darkness. It burned with the fire of a fusion reactor and the soul of a Signian resonator, a final, defiant act of resonance that cauterized a wound in the fabric of the universe. The light washed over the pod, a final, fleeting touch, before fading back into the quiet, star-dusted dark. The galaxy was safe. The price had been paid. The story would be told.